Welcome to Our Interesting Times with host Timothy Kelly, who interviews today's top alternative and revisionist thinkers.
May you live in interesting times.
This evening, my guest is Chris Kendall. He is the host of Hoaxbusters Call. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Tim. How are you doing?
Very well. Thanks for coming on the show. Back on the show. Last time we talked, I think, was February. So now a lot of things have happened, with the presidential selection. We have our choices that have been given to us. It's Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, of course, is always the libertarian candidate. What's his name? Johnson?
Was it Gary Johnson?
Gary Johnson,
Gary Johnson,
so-called libertarian candidate. And who is it? Stein? What's her name again? The Green Party candidate? Jill Stein? Jill Stein, yeah. Jill Stein. But of course, that may come up in tonight's discussion. Of course, Hoaxbusters Call. You've had a number of interesting discussions in the past few months. Here, have you back? Anything new on that show? Anything you want to mention, or anything that I missed? Or
well, I think since the last time we spoke, there's been, events in the media that have been put out there, and they kind of fall in this kind of same general category as a lot of the same patterns that seem to reemerge over and over. So you have that, and then I kind of get since it gets sort of repetitive, I kind of like to divert off into different subjects, on the Hoaxbusters Call, and I kind of talked a little bit about. Just gave out my thoughts last time about the economy and last couple of calls, and just kind of just my musings on it and thoughts about it, and then and then usually kind of delves off into different topics, and then we have the afternoon commute that I do with John Adams, and we've been going into the punk rock scene, which is really interesting as far as all the different connections and the different peculiarities about the different personalities that populate the whole punk rock scene.
Oh yeah, I had John on a while back. We talked about that. That's very interesting. Yeah, he does kind of like a Dave McGowan type analysis of that. Correct?
Right. Yeah. It is sort of like what Dave McGowan was uncovering with his research.
I think John actually corresponded with him with his research when Dave was doing those series of articles prior to the book.
Yes, and we had Dave on Afternoon Commute for it was a couple of months. It wasn't that long before he passed. Before he died.
Yeah, I talked to him like a month before his diagnosis. He actually was my first podcast with Dave McGowan. Yeah, my first guest. Wow. Yeah, so yeah, I talked to him about Program to Kill and Laura Canyon, because I wanted to get kind of get a twofer there, because figured. So, but yeah, unfortunately, he did pass away. But yeah. So you recently talked about the punk rock scene. I'm sorry.
The punk rock scene, that's correct, and then all the different. I mean, if you want to kind of boil it down to kind of stuff where we usually explore, it's the idea of culture creation. Like, where does your culture actually come from? I mean, is it like punk rock? You would think, I think the average person would think that it's just some young guys, probably most likely in a garage, and then they're just kind of hacking away at their guitars, and then one day punk rock is sort of invented, I guess. I mean, or something like that. But and then that's how it gets started. But that's reminiscent of a lot of stuff you hear about. The personal computer started in the garage, and the Google started in the basement of the two. Just that's the stories we're always given. But but then if that's the case, why do you run into all these connections? Why do you run into like these a lot of the people that are prominent in the punk rock scene coming out of the same like universities and art schools, and why are so many of them connected with prominent people in Washington D.C.? Why did the punk scene originate, or at least the American version of it originate out of Washington D.C.?
Is Henry Rollins, right?
Yeah, who is Henry Rollins? Who is
Grover Park,
Ian McKay? Yeah. Who are all these prominent punk rockers that are instrumental in fomenting the whole punk rock scene? Like, who are these people, and what are their connections, and what are their different relationships, with the establishment that they're allegedly purported to oppose, and that's it's interesting how it's just assumed that this is anti-establishment, but then you go digging around, and then it's like, well, it's like it's very, very closely tied at the hip with the establishment.
The same with the with the Police, right? And Stuart Copeland, I think, was the drummer, I think it's the founding member of the band. Of course, he comes from his father was Miles Copeland, right?
And then they had what was it? IRS records.
Yeah, I think it's FBI and IRS. The two other brothers, I think, run a corporation. Their acronym is FBI, which is I think that's like a talent agency or something, if I got that right. And IRS records, yeah. So.
And then you see the connections there, and then we went into the Talking Heads, the Velvet Underground, and then you have the club CBGB's, which was in New York City, and then that's supposedly where one of the first venues where punk rock was showcased, with bands like the Ramones and like I named already, Velvet Underground, Talking Heads. Talking Heads not really, I guess, musically classified as punk, but they have an association with it. But you looking at all those bands, or MC5 and all that, and I'm not the best at remembering all the names and the connections, but you listen back to that. It's at hoaxbusterscall.com. You listen to that. The podcast we did, John did a really good job at bringing up all those connections, and also we had another a person who's a listener that was looking into this as well, and he found our material with the afternoon commutes by searching internet, doing his own research, and he's like, oh well, here's all this stuff I found. So we incorporated all his findings into, and he goes by the moniker Nino 210, which is a handle that he uses. But that's was a lot of further confirmation, and so we touched on that, and that audio has still not been posted. I just now remember that we had to scrap it because of technical difficulties, and we actually had to reschedule for today, but like I was telling you, I can't get on Skype, which is the first time this has ever happened to me. And so I'm not saying that we're being sabotaged. I'm just saying this is just odd.
Well, it was, I think it was Catherine Austin Fitz was talking about how people are harassed. And it's more common than people think. And you don't have to be that big to be harassed, by the way, according to her. But she says one thing you can do is they can just increase the cost of your business, of doing business, by making sure when you send an email out that every third email doesn't go through, or every fifth email doesn't go through, or selected ones don't get through. You have to send it twice or three times, and just kind of. And this can be done. I guess it can be done robotically. So it's not like there's a person doing this to you. They just have you on file somewhere, and they can set this up, and where your business is just disrupted and just kind of harassed, and to the point where it just makes it more difficult for you.
Well, it's not like they don't have the resources to do it, and it's not like we've heard all these stories come out about that precise thing. I mean, there was that one document that came out by what was the guy's Cass Sunstein saying, they needed to put people out there, hired by the government or DHS or whatever particular alphabet agency you have to be to disrupt the so-called conspiracy theorists out there on the internet, because it's a bad thing, and we need to put some opposition out there to this all this conspiracy talk going on.
Yeah, cognitive infiltration, I think was the term he used.
Yeah, cognitive infiltration, and then you have the I mean, the name of it is on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of it, but it's out of England. It's out of Britain, Great Britain. They have this. Oh, they have this huge complex that's kind of devoted to, at least in part, to doing that sort of thing. And I wish I could remember the name of it, but yeah. And then there's all these different, of course, Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 has been.
It's not GCHQ, is it?
That's it. GCHQ,
okay,
right?
Yeah. That's their NSA. That's their
NSA. British. Yeah, and then there was a story that came out about their little agents that go out onto the internet and into forums and into posts and all that. So yeah, I guess if you're operating a small time podcast or something like myself, that there would be I guess enough of these people out there to assign someone to. I don't know. It's really it's not out of the question though. I mean, I don't think, with all that information that's out there. And yeah, like you're saying, it could be done with software. I mean, you don't have to have somebody sitting there at the other end of a terminal actually, disconnecting my Skype calls or anything. But
it can be set like it was almost like an update.
Yeah, it could just be. Yeah, I mean, it's with computers, anything is possible. With right? Yeah, I don't put it past them. I think that you got to have something for these people to do. I mean, there's no real terrorism to speak of that. I don't think that at all. There is no real terrorist threat to the United States or to Britain or anywhere else. So you got to keep these people busy somehow or another.
Yeah, you got to create business.
Well, it's the same thing with your average cop out there. What do they spend inordinate amount of their time doing? It's like pulling people over for just really trivial stuff. And you got to wonder, like, okay, how do you have time for all this? You've been standing out, you have me here on the side of the road for a good, 20 minutes, half an hour, writing a ticket for a burnout, license plate lamp. And, I mean, that's happened to me. For some reason, since I moved back here a lot, and I've gotten pulled over probably more in the last 4 or 5 years than I've had the rest of my life driving, and I'm almost 50. But it's like, well, there's just too many cops here. They got to have something to do.
Yeah, and they got to, and of course that supports their budgets, which supports the payroll and overtime and things like that. And a lot of these counties during the bubble became heavily overstaffed, and to maintain their payrolls, they've resorted to taxation through citation. And so what they've done is they've raised the fines, and they just increase policing for those little petty fines so they can get the money rolling in,
Yeah, and last time I got a seatbelt ticket, which, if you go into the law, and I've ranted and raved about this before, just on on the Hoaxbusters call about about the law and the courts and about tickets. And so technically it's not illegal to drive around without a seatbelt in the state of Oklahoma if you're operating if you're in a pickup or any kind of truck, because truck, the way it's defined, covers pickup trucks. And I've had this confirmed by the city district attorney and also the state district attorney that was I had to deal with the ticket with the highway patrol. And I had them both dismissed because I just pointed out the law. I said, well, here's the definition of truck. And I was driving a truck, and then,
Yeah.
So I was, it's really irritating to keep getting a ticket for something that's not even against the law. And so where was I going with this? I had a point, but I forget. But yeah,
talk about we start out with there's no real terrorism, so they need a justification for their existence. So
yeah, they need a justification for their existence, and that. Oh, okay. Here's what I was going to bring up. During the course of that, I put in a public records request for all the revenue that was generated from seatbelt tickets within the last fiscal year. And they gave me the runaround. I spent like an entire half a day trying to find out where do I submit a public records request, and then I finally went to finally the buck stopped because I was talking to a cop, and then he was like, "Yeah, I'll help you out," and then he was basically kind of. He was talking to this guy, and he's saying, "Well, this gentleman needs to fill out a public records request, and he's been given the runaround, and can you help him out?" And I think that's the only reason why they finally let me submit one, which they never responded to. So, yeah, they don't want you to know all the revenue that's being generated to these, and it's only $20 for the fine. That's the amount of the fine was $20. Yeah. And but if they can write, if one officer can write a couple of those a day, maybe 2 or 3 a day, maybe however many in each officer that's out there on their beat,
mm-hmm.
that runs into a pretty substantial amount after a while. And then and you consider too that how many pickups are in Oklahoma, for crying out loud. How many of that is just actually by now? See, I think the law myself. I think that the law, quote unquote, law is it's based on a flawed premise. I don't believe in it. As it stands now. It's not that I don't believe in rules and societal organization of some sort. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that as everything that we take for granted as far as the law, it's not anything real. It's just some kind of a construct, and it's not, and as a social construct, it's not logical. It's arbitrary, and it's not evenly applied. It's not, and to me, it's not that makes it illegitimate. But even with that said, on its surface, here they are enforcing a law that is not a law, and generating revenue. So isn't that by definition theft? I mean, theft by anybody's set of criteria. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're enforcing seatbelt laws, and your vehicle falls into the category of exempt. Like for instance, if you're riding a motorcycle, they can't pull you over and issue a seatbelt ticket because you're expressly excluded from the seatbelt requirement, obviously, because motorcycles don't have seatbelts on. It'd be kind of ridiculous to have a seatbelt on a motorcycle. But also alongside motorcycles in the state of Oklahoma is trucks, and you say, well, trucks, Chris, they're talking about like milk trucks and tanker trucks and big trucks. I said, well, no, where is that defined? And that was my question. Well, where is that defined? And but the definition, the way that it's worded, and it's worded vaguely, and that's another thing. The law is not supposed to be worded in vague terms that the average person can understand. But I pointed this out to the DA, and he said he told me that I was correct, and dropped the ticket. They dropped the ticket. This happened twice. So yeah, and they know that they're enforcing this law, and that's why I wanted the numbers. How much revenue is collected,
yeah.
And then I wanted to ask, how much of these are pickups, and then how many tickets are you writing for something that's not against the law and generating this much revenue for something that's not. But see, that I would conclude from that. I mean, I don't think everybody would, but I conclude from that it's like the law itself is just some kind of a racket. It's not real. It's not. It's there to control you and me, but it's not real. It's not applied evenly, and it's not legitimate. It's not, it's arbitrary, capricious. It's not.
Yeah, you've made that point regarding the federal income tax, where the government really could easily create its own money to meet the general cost, but instead they resort to this invasive, income tax with all the compliance costs and threats. And you've made the point that this is more about conditioning than it is about just simply getting money to pay for whatever boondoggle they think they should have.
Oh yeah, and then well, you've heard of Walter Burien?
Yes, he's the guy who does the on the the double books or something, the blue books or something.
Yeah, he talks about the comprehensive annual financial report.
The CAFRs.
And I went to the library one time when I was living down in Texas in Wichita Falls, and I was looking into all that stuff, and I asked for the librarian there for you have a copy of the CAFR, and she was like, yeah, I mean, like, and then it was kind of like. It was kind of like, why do you want that? But she didn't say that, but she went and got it, and I looked at it, and I'm not an accountant. I'm not, good with numbers and all that, but yeah, it's all these different accounts. But see, I mean, for me, if you're talking about any kind of entity, whether it be an individual, a private individual that's has a lot of investments or had an inheritance or has a lot of money or has a lot of income coming in or something like that. Somebody that would be classified as, wealthy, they have a lot of, revenue coming into their, to support themselves and to support their, lifestyle or whatever. Those people don't have to work, if they don't want to, because they have investments, and the investments, generate revenue, whether it be, real estate investments or stock portfolio or whatever. The government's no different, and why would they be? The government as a corporation or as an entity, and corporations are defined as persons. So they have, and they certainly do. They have all this, all these accounts, and then the most, I guess, the well-known one would be like retirement accounts, right? Mm-hmm. So what about the revenue that's generated in dividends and stuff from all these accounts? It's just, to me, it just makes it's just really kind of a no-brainer. Like, of course that's true. I mean, like I said, I'm not an accountant, but that's the information that like Walter Burien points out and stuff like that. I totally believe that that's the case, and that the government owns about over 75% of all the entire stock market through their different investments and stuff that have been made to these accounts that he describes as off the books or second set of books or something like that. Because when they tell you about the need for a tax increase, they're just taking in consideration revenues and versus their expenses. So when they're talking about all the revenue generated from like tickets and all that stuff like that, that's factored in and all that. And then their expenses, and if there's like a budget shortfall or something, then they start making taxes. So they don't ever include the all those accounts and all those all that extra loot that they're sitting on. And yeah, I believe that that's true. I mean, that they wouldn't have to charge not one more cent in taxes to run the so-called services of the government and do all that they need to do. They wouldn't need to charge one more penny in taxes. They could do it all from these investment accounts and all this stuff. I'm 100% certain of that.
And it wouldn't necessarily mean that government would be free, because government's still consuming resources. But what you're saying is that it's just one more expense they add on. The question is, why are they doing this? It's just because of the sheer greed, or they want to, again, keep the people conditioned to complying with these tax laws and various.
Yeah, it's just a tool of social engineering, social control. That's all that taxes are for. They're there to. There's a quote. It goes something like. I don't know the quote, but the paraphrase it is something like, we control the people through the power of the purse, more or less. That's basically what it says, and I forgot who say it, but yeah, That's true. That's how people are controlled through the power of the purse. Like, you make life decisions based on whether or not you can afford it, or afford to have another child, or afford to go into that business, or afford to maintain it. Just countless decisions in the average person's lives is dependent upon their finances, right? I mean, so and a lot of people pay very careful attention to whether it is they're going to go into a business venture or buy a piece of real estate or something like that. Like, what are my taxes going to be? How's this? Because a lot of times, what a lot of people find out, when they want to, like, say for instance, like they're like a husband and wife, and the wife wants to, make jewelry and sell it on the internet or something like that. You have to take into consideration, it's like, well, how much are we going to be taxed on this extra income? Because a lot of times when it finds out, it could push you up into a different bracket or something like that. And it's like, well, it's not even worth it unless it's, you just love to work for the government and not get anything out of it, because that's what will happen a lot of times. But
the marginal tax becomes so high, it's not worth the effort anymore. Yeah.
And that's the way that is the way to control the population, or one way to do it. But I think it's just a tool. It's just a tool of control, and I think that's what it's always ever been. They have the different incentives, for marriage tax and marriage, joint filings and all this other stuff. It's just all tools of social control.
Yeah, like a mortgage payment is tax deductible, but rent isn't.
Right.
So you buy a house. Well, it makes sense to buy a house now because we can deduct our monthly payment from our income liability, federal income liability, as opposed to when we were renting. We couldn't do that. So that makes people buy houses more often, or makes more people buy houses than otherwise would be the case, which again distorts the whole market. Same thing with 401ks, right? It's a big sop to Wall Street, because it forces people in their retirement accounts by taxing. You can defer the tax, but it gets you into the pump and dump scheme we call Wall Street. And those people can be fleeced every 5 to 7, 10 years with the pump and dump scheme, that they do up there at the stock market. And people don't think in the meantime, people don't realize they're being ripped off, because with inflation, it's hard to gauge these things, because you can't rely anything with monetary values, because monetary values are always, change with the inflation rate.
Yeah, well, all kinds of stuff factors into this thing called the economy, and I'm just totally convinced that the only reason for taxes to exist is to manage it and to control people's behavior to one degree or another. And plus another thing too, and if you think about this, it's a way for the government to be all up in your business, so they have to, you have to give them records and, itemized lists and everything that you're doing in your business and in your personal life and whatever, anything you want to have written off taxes, you have to write all this stuff down and fill it out and send it in to them. Mm-hmm. So they have records of all that, so they can just, keep track and, of people and have an entryway into your personal business, through this taxation schemes, But it's totally unnecessary.
And then they can criminally prosecute you on the evidence they've made you provide against yourself, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Well, there you go with your, law, quote unquote law. It's like, oh well, you have the Fifth Amendment right, but here's this, and that exception to that. Oh well, yeah. This is an exception to that. Or there's always some exception to that. Yeah, it's like the Second Amendment. Like a lot of people talk the Second Amendment about the right of the ownership of firearms, and they'll say, well, you have a right to bear arms. But, not at a school, not at a church, not here, not there, not if you're a felon, not if you're, So there's all these stipulations put upon this so-called right.
Not if you're mentally ill. They've tried. No, I'm saying that's not the law yet, but they've suggested that mental illness can be a criteria for depriving someone of their Second Amendment rights.
Oh, sure.
As if that's not a subjective standard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what constitutes mentally ill? Exactly.
Psychiatry's never been politicized, right?
Whoa, no. Why are you all that? Yeah. How dare you suggest that, Tim?
Well, you want crazy people to have guns. That's the retort.
Yeah. And then crazy people can include somebody that had to get a prescription for, insomnia medication or something.
Or is suffering from opposition defiance disorder.
Oh, yeah. What is it? ODD. I think I have that. Yeah. No, it is. So what about the Second Amendment? It's like, well, here's the thing about it. It's like, well, if it's a right, then it can't be infringed upon, right? You can't have all these stipulations around a right, but yet we do, So then we have this gun control debate, But then, like, well, if the law, I always want to put quotes around law. If it is what it's always presented to be, like some kind of a objective standard that all the the power or the people who are in government and the in the system, everything, they have to adhere within those boundaries of the so-called law, and then the laws and enshrined in the Constitution. Okay, if that's really the case, then there is no debate. There is no gun control debate to be had, because it's like, well, that's part of the Constitution, and there is no debating it. Like it's an objective standard that we have to adhere to. Now you can suggest that, okay, we're going to have to now have change the Constitution if we wanted to. But are they suggesting that? No, they said we want more infringements on this right. It's like, well, yeah, you wouldn't if it really was. It really was anything to it, then we wouldn't even be able to discuss it, because it would just be off the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's certainly obviously not the case.
Yes.
And it's just like everything else in the law: the Fourth Amendment, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment. They have all these stipulations, and always have had all these different restrictions on your so-called rights, and they're always changing and fluctuating all the time. So it's like, yeah, it's absolutely not some objective set of criteria in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, whenever there's an apparent hurdle to some sort of governmental program or agenda, say like war is a good example of that, and there's a constitutional, say slavery is, involuntary servitude is prohibited by the U.S. United States Constitution by way of the 13th Amendment, but it, without due process, one cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or and it also bans involuntary servitude. But then when the government resorted to conscription in 1917, and someone sued saying this was a violation of the 13th Amendment, the Supreme Court said, well, no, this isn't slavery, it's conscription.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all states do this, and since the federal government is a state, and since Germany and Russia and Great Britain do it, then we're allowed to do it. So much for American exceptionalism, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I think I don't know exactly where it is, but I suspect there's somewhere in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, or whatever. There's some kind of a disclaimer in there. There's got to be. Like some of the bottom. Yeah, if this, then all. What is the legal phraseology? I can't. Yeah, or something about void where void. I think the one with about the Constitution, it's all, you have all these rights and you have everything, due process and all that, unless there's some sort of problem. We got some sort of a boogeyman or something that can contend with, and then it's all void, And
then was it 1940? FDR resorted to peacetime conscription. And it's just a good example of conditioning. Is that would not have been possible if not for World War I, and the fact that people submitted to conscription in World War I to send an expeditionary force to Europe. That's something that the American people did not expect, nor did most members of Congress expect when Wilson got his declaration of war. in 1917, April 1917. But people get conditioned to these things, and then 5 years, was it 10 years later, they've been conscripted to go out, fight and die in Korea. I mean, for a police action, for a UN action. So this is how people get that generation that went off to fight the good war. Went off to fight the good war. Was going to go off meekly, and then they might not like it, but they've been conditioned to accept conscription. Whereas without that earlier time, many Americans would not have accepted that if not for the conditioning of the past the previous 30 years. So.
Well, that's how it works. I mean, if you look up legitimacy, like it's kind of the if you're trying to find an underpinning or something that's that sets up this thing called law, you look up the legitimacy as in regards to the law, and what gives the law or the so-called authorities, what gives them the legitimacy, and it's pretty interesting to go and to look at that definition. It essentially, the way I understand it, is that what it comes down to is, and the way it reads, I think this is what's conveyed in that definition, is that it's whatever the population will put up with.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what it comes down to. And then you said that when you're talking about conscription, it's like they, in World War I, they submitted to it, and that's the key phrase. Is like they submitted to it. They had the propaganda that prepared them for it, and like you said, it was a good war, and then they were conditioned to accept it because it's like, hey, this is some necessity that we have to, allow this.
And then there's Hollywood, because in 1941, you have Gary Cooper playing Sergeant York, who the movie starts where he is he's a protester. He doesn't want to go fight in the war. He's a pacifist, and the movie's about his attempts to avoid going to war. But finally, he loses his case, and he has to go fight. But he becomes a war hero, captures 140 Germans by himself or something like that. And so the story there is, be a pacifist, stay at home, be a coward, or you can go off and fight and be a hero like Gary Cooper or Sergeant York. And of course, it's no coincidence that movie is being released in 1941, just before America's entering into the Second World War.
Yeah, you heard about the white feather in Britain.
Oh, yeah, that was just on my mind. Yeah, the women. This is what women are responsible for this. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, talk about it. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead and say it, because I don't know all the particulars about it either. I was
women were told, remember, Great Britain, when first went to war in 1914, had a tradition, much like the United States, of not having conscription, because they always had the Navy. And they always had a small expeditionary force that relied on volunteers. Mm. There was a tradition in Great Britain which they never conscripted, but this is part of that splendid isolation, staying off directly, avoid being directly involved in continental wars, and always fighting on the periphery, that sort of thing. But what happened was, after the Battle of the Somme, I think, so many had died that they had to resort to conscription. And so to get people to do this, actually, I'm jumping the gun here. This was before conscription. What happened was,
right,
not because the war was so horrible, not enough people were going off to fill the hollowed ranks that were being machine gunned down by the Germans. So at first they started the psychological warfare thing, where they hired, pretty young women to go out and hand white feathers to young British men who weren't in the army. And why haven't you signed up yet? And they hand them a white feather as a sign of their cowardice. So great societal pressure. This is something like that's almost like something out of Bernays or something. Although I don't think it was him. But how they would convince people, you be a man, go off and fight and die in the trenches. That's what men do. That's something about out of some dystopian film or something, about some oppressive regime or something like that. But but I mean, you read about the accounts in the trenches about going over the top and just being mowed down by the thousands. Mm-hmm. You're thinking, how could thinking individuals be told they had to do this?
I know.
and have them submit to it.
Yeah, it's conditioning, and well, I mean that's alive and well in the modern day. That's why they have, if you watch, some major sporting event, especially like football. There was one, I don't remember, the Super Bowl before last or what, and they had like the Blue Angels fly over the stadium, and then they had like, oh, it was just way over the top with all the militarism, and then they had
actually having to build bigger stadiums because the flags have gotten so big.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's like
make them bigger, make the flag bigger, make it, and then they had what was it? It was such blatant recruitment propaganda during the halftime and the commercials and stuff. It was just really over the top and extreme. Yeah, I have to go back and look at that, but it was just ridiculous.
Yeah, they have one ad. I remember watching it. The ad where the Marines, we never retreat, and it shows these soldiers just running down in a desert forward towards smoke, yelling, and that's question is, what are they running towards, and what's the mission, and what's going on here? But that's the or the Navy, was it a global force for good? Yeah, as if we have 12 aircraft carriers to go offer relief to some earthquake-stricken country or something. That's why we have 12 aircraft carriers.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it could. Well, it has been that has been done, and it could be done. But yeah, that's not what it's for.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, they're there. I mean, it's nice that they can, but that's not a justification for having this huge Navy, especially when you have a $20 trillion national debt. But again, getting in the national debt and the economy, that itself, although it's on the books, it's notional. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you think about it, and who do we owe it to, and do we owe it to somebody? I mean, I know it's the full faith credit of the United States, the American people, the taxpayer. But if you think about, why should the people who bought those bonds be guaranteed? Especially given the level of debt that the U.S. government carries. Well, it's all backed up because you have this thing called the U.S. dollar, which is, as you've talked about, is a tool of social conditioning, social engineering, and also is it's an illusion. It's a con game. It's a trick.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, if you just take into consideration the military, I mean, just the military and all the support personnel and the money and the resources that go into maintaining all the military bases, not only in the United States but all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this tremendous expenditure, and if you stop and think about, okay, like what is the average military member like? What is their contribution to the to society as far as like what do they produce? I mean, now there's so ostensibly they're providing the service to the country of defending the country, but I just don't believe. Maybe this will parlay off into the nuke discussion, because I think this kind of ties in with nukes, but like the idea that, well, I mean, it's the idea, or the premise is based on why we need the military is to defend us against other hostile nations like China or whatever. I mean, that's the idea. But then, okay, I don't think that is. I don't think that's the condition of the way the world is set up right now. I don't think the United States or any reasonably prosperous industrialized nation has that as a concern, a real legitimate concern. Because we have that we have that recorded in different wars in the past. Like what did Hirohito say something about why he didn't invade California? Is because, well, there would be a gun behind every blade of grass, right? and like supposedly Hitler said the same thing about Switzerland, right? That's why he went around it, didn't invade. I mean, that should tell you that, well, that's your national defense, or that's the way it can be constructed, is, have individuals owning their own, military grade weapons to defend off, any foreign invaders or anything like that. But see, we're supposedly under this nuclear threat. So, if we didn't have the strong national defense and we didn't have a nuclear arsenal, then, then the Russians would get us, So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the premise, and all this militarism is largely based upon, to a large degree. But all these people in the military and the, support personnel and all the civilian personnel that support them and all that, they're not actually producing anything of real tangible value. So this huge expenditure and all these people, these, however many thousands upon thousands of people that are employed by the military, what if that money was parlayed into just creating other types of jobs that weren't associated with the military? I mean, would that not work? Why wouldn't it work? But that doesn't enter in discussion, because as it stands now, if you want to take also the military and also like a lot of these useless government agencies and stuff like that, and do away with them, that would be a huge chunk of the economy that would be gone.
Yeah.
And then yeah.
And it's a lot of this is based on debt and the fact that the U.S. dollar is a world's reserve currency, ultimately backed by, people say nothing, but I think it's backed by the U.S. military. We have the petrodollar and the narco dollar, which plays a huge role, I think, in banking and finance and Wall Street, and even buying up, from what I understand, is also buying up a lot of the U.S. debt now, because China and Japan aren't buying as much as they used to, and that's being done under the table, and that betrays the falsity of the drug war, because the drug war is there to maintain the narco dollar, which supports the banking system in Wall Street and the U.S. Treasury, I think. But it's one of these things where I think what we have here is we have so much of this I guess you could say infrastructure built that's non-productive. Whether that even applies to like the legal profession, the bureaucracies, these things. But right now, you take your example, the defense budget, the Pentagon's budget, and how much of that really is designed for, it's politically engineered. It's designed to maintain jobs in congressional districts. And a good example of that, as a tribute to that system, of pork through the Pentagon budget, is the Navy named the aircraft carrier after one of the biggest pork barrel congressmen ever regarding defense spending. It was Carl Vinson, the USS Carl Vinson. Mm-hmm. They even named the aircraft carrier after this guy because he got so many big spending programs through for the Pentagon. So they name an aircraft carrier after him, which I think it's telling. There's actually an aircraft carrier named after a congressman. Usually, you have to be a president for that to happen. But if you look at how it's done, good examples is the F-35 fighter, which is a huge boondoggle, can barely fly, can't fly in the rain, but it's been tens, hundreds of billions of dollars over the past 10, 15 years. But that money is going to certain congressional districts, and that's why I think 300 congressional districts are involved in some sort of defense spending at one time. So they know how to divide it up to make sure that that the spending continues. Make sure congressional districts benefit of it. And also, more like 353, I think. But I think there are more than 300 congressmen who are directly invested into Defense Department firms, defense contracting firms. Mm-hmm. So if you look at their investment portfolio, they own stock in companies that are involved in military contracting. At the same time, they're voting to approve those spending programs, which ultimately enrich themselves because they're invested in those companies. There's a conflict of interest there, and there's no law against that.
Well, like in this system, in this money system that we're in, that we take for granted, and the necessity of all this stuff, because it's something you could turn that. I mean, that of course, the military-industrial complex is one of the biggest examples of that. You make something like war fighting into this huge, massive industry that the livelihoods of thousands upon thousands of people all over the country are dependent upon it. And then, you can't tell me that doesn't shape people's attitudes towards war. You're not going to have somebody that's like a total, pacifist ideologue, want to work for, a military contractor or anything like that. I mean, but then, when people have that understanding that their livelihood is dependent upon these weapons of war and all the, support for the war and stuff like that. I mean, I would think that would make them more inclined to be pro, interventionist or pro-war, and
because they got to rationalize their job.
Yeah, they have to rationalize their job. It's just like the police; they have to have a rationale for their existence. And then when you see all this manufactured terror and all this other nonsense that's being promulgated through the media and through these think tanks and whoever's responsible for orchestrating all this stuff. Then that's a huge benefit to this huge status apparatus, which includes the police and all the DHS and all these alphabet agencies, and so they're going to have a vested interest in the belief in such a thing and the need for their protection. Yeah,
and when you have an agency like the Pentagon, a department spending anywhere from $450 to $700 billion a year on so-called defense programs, that's going to have a terrible distorting effect on the economy. You can't get around that, and that's going to put so much momentum in terms of just policy. And one good example of that is that if you are an outfit like Lockheed or General Dynamics, and you're raking in 120 a billion a year or 80 billion a year or whatever on contracts, and you turn that around and you throw a few million at a think tank, or you throw a few million at a news program, and you look at all the news programs, whether it's on Fox or MSNBC or CBS, NBC. Sunday morning, if you want to, I don't watch those shows anymore, but if you turn them on, public affairs shows are all sponsored by Lockheed Martin. And if they're talking about war, what do you think? I mean, obviously, that shows they're gonna promote an agenda, or at least a point of view that's going to support the interests of Lockheed Martin, and the peace isn't in the interest of Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, that is the reason I believe that that there's even support at all for these wars, because it's already an entrenched industry. There's already all this dependency upon it, and then that's the incentive to want to go along with it. And I think that's a good example of how we're controlled by the power of the purse.
And that's true. Example with the universities. If you the so-called experts, foreign policy experts, the people who get the PhDs in these things, the people that the mainstream news or people go to get the views of crises or foreign affairs or international affairs, there's a strong bias towards interventionism in war, because it's the interventionism, the meddling, the foreign meddling, the wars which create prestige and power or money for these jobs, right? So very rarely do you get like an expert in foreign policy who's a non-interventionist, right? Because it's not in his interest to be a non-interventionist, because if we are a non-interventionist and we leave countries alone, his job goes away. And so there you go. I mean, it's.
Yeah, well, that's how that you can put out these mass media events like that, have terrorism as part of their theme, like 9/11 or Boston bombing or something like that. The way that it is put out there in the media, there's glaring inconsistencies. You'll have these stuff that can be pointed out, like Building 7 is a big one where it's like, it just fell on its own, which is absolutely preposterous.
And
but then
not only did it fall on its own, it's being reported that it did fail before it fell.
yeah, they reported it. Yeah, it fell before it even fell.
I saw two. Well, one, there's the famous BBC Jane Stanley doing it, and that's one most people are familiar with. But here, the local Fox affiliate reported it as well. Building 7 has collapsed, and as they're talking, you see it, and it goes down. It's like as it's going down, before it goes down, all of a sudden, then the newscaster goes, "There it goes now."
Right. Well, Tim, that's obviously some kind of coincidence. Or could time zones account for that? I don't think so. No, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, absolutely absurd, right? I mean, come on. It falls without being hit by a plane or anything. It just falls, collapses, looks exactly like a controlled demolition, just so happens to, but no, it fell from fires is what the officials say. Now, that's just absolutely just ridiculous. But why do so many people accept that? Why do people in general? I think there's plenty of people who don't. They say, "Oh, yeah, that's ridiculous. That didn't happen. And something's going on there. We don't know what, but something happened." But by and large, people accept that as reality, which can't possibly be reality. It's nothing could be further from the truth. There's no way that it could fall like that from fires. There's just no way. But back to the economy and why people believe in war. It's like, well, they have an investment into the system. An investment. That's where their livelihood is tied into patriotism, nationalism. Defense. Fighting a good fight and fighting wars, and and then the only thing that people were focused on was, oh, who's this enemy, and what are we going to do? And we got to go, fight them. And so there's that already built-in preconditioning to have any kind of persuasion at all. But it's what's really interesting to me. It's like in the presentation that they put out, they basically fed us cartoon physics and cartoon reality, something like really just patently absurd. Like for instance, I point out the planes going in, one side of the tower and coming out the other side. I put that in the category as of like a Warner Brothers cartoon or something like that.
You're talking about the nose appears.
Yeah, the nose, the fuselage comes out the other side. It's in multiple different, so-called amateur footage and stuff like that, where you see and also Peter Jennings said, well, we saw the plane come in one side and out the other, and then there was like the street guy they interviewed. He said the same thing and went in one side and came out the other side, which is impossible. I mean, there's no way it's possible.
Yeah, because the nose is fiberglass.
Yeah, it's fiberglass, and it's not gonna. And then the rest is aluminum, so it's not gonna. It's not gonna just punch through, concrete and steel, come out the other side. It's just not possible.
But what does that suggest then?
Well, see, I wasn't there, so people said, there was for sure planes because they saw planes. Well, here's people that I don't know, that I've never met, that say that they were there and said they saw it.
That's why I asked that question, because I was confronted with that question over the 4th of July weekend family gathering, and it had come up about fakery. And my point was, fakery, we know it exists. The question is, to what degree does it exist? That's the only question. And of course, I point out the standard examples of CNN faking the missile attacks during the Scud missile attacks during the Gulf War, other examples of just fake news. But I said my point was, I don't know. All I know is the vast majority of the world experienced 9/11 through the medium of television, and that is very open to manipulation. So fakery is possible.
Definitely.
Yeah. And
then, I don't believe planes crashed into the buildings. I believe it was computer generated imagery. Now, because let's say I had the ability to prove beyond a shadow of doubt that imagery is computer generated. Just hypothetically, I can't, but let's just say that I could. Even if you could prove that, does that prove that there wasn't an actual plane that crashed in the building and then they presented us with CGI for whatever reason? I don't know. How do you prove that? But I don't think, why would you need to if you got... It's all about perception management. If you could get people to think, what do you got to do to get people to believe that that's what happened? Well, I would think that you would have to have something happen in reality on the scene, right? Something. Something has to happen. It can't just be buildings sitting in there and then like they're showing you all this stuff on TV and you go look out your window and then there's not. I mean, that word would get around. I think it would. But if you have the explosions, which I think were real, and the smoke, which I think was real. And here's another thing I believe too. There was probably planes that flew over or in the area, so people saw planes. Did they see a plane crashing into the building? It's like, well, if they were at the right, happened to be looking at the building at the right precise time from the right angle, because most of the sky is obscured if you're in a city with a bunch of tall buildings. Then that would limit to the number of people who could possibly have actually seen it slam into the building. So that you have a very controlled environment right there, a very controlled, situation that could be managed and manipulated and through imagery. And so the imagery that comes on the television fills in all the rest of the story. And then they even go further with that later and come out with a major motion picture like Flight 93 or something that even further fills in all the blanks. So
because most people's understanding of history is via Hollywood.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how people. The average person absorbs information about anything like history or geopolitics or whatever. It's through fiction and through film, television shows, movies, and so it comes down to the term perception management. Is what does it take to convey the idea that planes crashed into there and these were terrorists and hijackers? Well, you have it written out like a script, like a made-for-television movie, except for it's presented as real. But then along with that, you have to have the set, which I think the buildings in that complex was a set. And, you generate the explosions, you generate the smoke. I think a lot of the cars in the parking lot down below were rigged with some kind of devices that generate a bunch of smoke, so that you had the whole thing just obscured in smoke. You can't really see what's going on. You don't know what's going on, and then with that whole controlled situation, because the so-called authorities go in there and take over and lock down the area, you have a very controlled, very manageable situation, and then you just do the street theater, and then the media takes over the rest and then fills in all the blanks. All the blanks are filled in with the imagery.
And that would explain the things like Jane Stanley prematurely reporting on a collapse of a building, which was unprecedented, by the way. So the BBC is reporting on something that was unexpected and completely unprecedented in the history of modern, skyscrapers.
Yeah, I think you can either explain it in two ways. That was just a wild coincidence, or it was, a continuity error, I guess you might call it, or something where you're looking at a movie and it was pre-scripted, and Jane got ahead of herself on the script. She just read a couple too far ahead on the script. It's like that happens when you're doing a major production like that. You're gonna have errors. You're gonna have flaws. I mean, there's whole websites devoted to pointing these things out in movies. Oh, he had a 5 o'clock shadow in this scene, and then 10 seconds later, he's clean shaven.
And just then, didn't like the satellite link get cut off or something? When she's talking to the BBC news presenter in London.
Yeah, they pulled the feed. It's like boom, and it just all of a sudden goes down. And then maybe that was a coincidence too. It's just all coincidence after coincidence. But no, the best explanation is like, no, it's all was going according to a script. Mm-hmm. And you can't really say that if you're going to say that this was all kind of orchestrated by the lie hop theory, let it happen on purpose or anything. None of that fits. None of that fits that. But yeah, fakery fits that really, really nicely. I mean, it has so much explanatory power which it is a theory. It's a theory what happened, because you have to have a theory, because because the people that were most closely involved aren't going to be forthcoming with the truth. Mm-hmm. So like, conspiracy theory is a bad word, but in reality, it's not. No, it's not. It's not. It's not bad to to try to come up with explanations or come up with an idea or a framework that actually fits what you're being shown, and the inconsistencies and stuff that are also go along with it. And what best fits all of it. I think the idea that you're looking at these events, and these events are fictional events, and they're more the best way they can be understood as productions, film productions, movies.
Yeah, and there's a history to this. You have an example. You have the example of the War of the Worlds broadcast by Orson Welles at the I think it was the Mercury Theater, and that was Halloween Eve, 1938. And as it turns out, that was part of the Princeton Radio Research Project, and that they look into the use or the effects of mass media and also spreading fear. But you shoot ahead, to the Gulf War in 1991. Of course, I mentioned CNN's fakery with the fake missile attacks that were filmed, and you can see the reporters there acting it out as if they're in a missile attack. Really, they're in a studio, I believe, in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was just that was leaked because it was like a satellite feed being that was leaked years later. But of course, that begs the question: what other parts of that war were faked and were fed to us as real news? And still to this day, how do you look at that and watch the news and believe anything you see? At least not be skeptical. But a good example is the Second World War and Hollywood. Most people's understanding of that war is primarily through the movies and the propaganda of that period. Not many people know this but the newsreels, the films that were produced from the liberated camps like Dachau, many were faked. This was done by the Office of War Information, Office of Strategic Services, and this was I think it was C.D. Jackson who brought in a bunch of Hollywood directors, and they went into these camps. The conditions in the camps were horrible, but that wasn't part of an extermination plan by the Nazis. It was because of the conditions in Germany throughout. At the time, this was 1945, and Germany had been bombed back into the Stone Age. Her economy had collapsed, and Germany was experiencing famine and disease all throughout the nation. But a lot of the victims you saw were they did die of starvation and related diseases and also typhus. Nevertheless, it was used as propaganda, and Dachau and many other camps were explained to the public as being part of this network of extermination camps, part of the final solution, and that just simply isn't true. You also have the example of the faked gas chambers at Dachau and other camps. I think the official narrative of the Holocaust once said that there were 22 camps throughout Germany and occupied Europe, all involved in the final solution, the Holocaust. It turns out now the official narrative of the Holocaust now has reduced that number to 6. And you're probably familiar with Auschwitz and the disputed claims regarding the death the death count there. And at one point it was claimed 4 million died there. Now it's down to close to around 1 million or a little under, but they still cite the 6 million number. The condition in the camps, admittedly, were horrible, and of course, I'm not justifying the rounding up of political prisoners and putting them in camps, but it was war, and of course, the Allies weren't free from that sin either. I mean, we had Japanese internment camps here in this country, and I suggest that if America had been being bombed back in the stones like Germany was and was being invaded and her economy collapsed, the people in those camps wouldn't have fared much better than those in Germany.
Yeah, like that's okay somehow, oh, well, does it even matter how many died? 6 million, give or take. A couple of million, or even 5 million, or So it's, but it's illustrative of the fact that much of that is just pure propaganda. It's just pure propaganda. That's why the numbers need to be inflated. And an interesting thing about the media. We have different forms of media. We have the print media, the televised media, the radio. So probably the first example of mass media would be what came about after the advent of the steam-powered printing press, with the ability to take cheap paper like newsprint and print up hundreds of copies of something in a short period of time, and that was around the 1800s, the 1800s, the beginning of the 1800s, where it's around 1835, the Sun newspaper in New York got kicked off. We got the the steam powered printing presses kicked off, and what was their first major story was the if you go back and look at it now, it's the moon hoax of 1835, where they reported that there was a scientist. He's really good at optics, and built this whiz bang telescope, and they had all these scientific descriptors of it, and he got to looking around out there on the moon, and then to his shock and surprise, there's people living on the moon, and they got bat wings and they fly around, and they're up there with the bipedal beavers, little hut dwellers that have little. His telescope was so good he can make out the huts and the smoke coming out of the hut, and the bipedal beavers walking around, but the bat people flying around on the moon. And that was a major news story. It's a big scientific discovery. Probably the first big story. It turned out to be fantastical, far out, just hoax. But what's interesting about that, you mentioned this, the War of the Worlds. That would be an example of, that was around the time when there was in the 40s. That was around the time when radio was beginning to be, ubiquitous, and everybody had a radio in their household, and that would be another example of, right out of the gate, coming out with something that's purely fictional and fantastical, like aliens invading, and so it's interesting that we found them on the moon, and we put it in the newspaper, and then when the radio came about, they were invading, and that was in the War of the Worlds broadcast, phony broadcast. And then with the advent of television, the first television president, Kennedy, that was a big major event where he allegedly was assassinated. Now that I've examined that, I don't necessarily believe that there was anything that actually happened that day. I mean, I don't believe that Kennedy was killed. I mean, I know that sounds far out there, but it's just another example where the evidence doesn't hold up to scrutiny that anything actually happened, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of people will find that absolutely heretical and insane to suggest such a thing. But no, not in light of when you start looking into fakery, how long it's been around, and how instrumental it is in shaping this thing called civilization and part of our domestication process and stuff like that. It's not much of a stretch to include the assassination of John F. Kennedy in that, and then you start digging around in that, you see all this really interesting connections between other people involved in the Zapruder film, and how it came out, how the first time anybody set eyes was in the Jameson Film Company, the Hollywood of Texas, and how that was, they had to take it there for some reason to be developed, and then C.D. Jackson, the guy who had custody of the Zapruder film, just happened to be a background in psychological operations, the OSS.
Yeah, and he goes to C.D. Jackson when I mentioned he's the one that was involved in fakery at Dachau.
Yeah, he was also involved in fakery at Dachau,
yeah.
And then just it has a history of faking stuff, and just so happens to be intimately involved in handling the Zapruder film. And then I think the clincher for me, and how many points of evidence do you need? I think you just need one good, solid disconnect with the reality as far as what's being presented to you to conclude that you're dealing with a fake event. And that's Jackie's dress, not having any blood on her backside. And then you take that photo, that's her backside is for the most part, no appearance of any blood on her backside, where she was sitting down on a seat, and then they show you the seat and it's covered with blood and brains. Not possible. You can't be sitting on a seat covered with blood and brain matter and not have any get on your backside. It's just not possible.
And supposedly the Secret Service took the limousine and had it washed, cleaned.
Yeah, they had it clean. They also took Jackie's dress and put it in the archives where nobody can view it for the next. I think they're gonna
75 years or something.
75 years. Yeah, why? You can see Jack Kennedy's shirt. You see Connolly's clothes. It's all on display in the museum, but not Jackie's dress. Well, I think that's because there was some oversight or something there, and then they came to the realization that's like, oh yeah, we can't have people like examining this dress because they might eventually put two and two together with the discontinuity between the seat, the dress, and why not just put blood on the dress and fake it? They faked everything else. Why can't they just do that? Well, no, they already had the evidence is already out there in the form of photographs and already in newsprint and already disseminated out to the public. And so the diversion tactics have worked very, very well into concealing the fact that the whole thing was fake by having a cottage industry built around the JFK conspiracy theories, books, DVDs, speakers, lectureships, podcasts devoted to it, and it's on and on and on. It's just. And I think they spin the yarn around the thing so that they just keep you endlessly occupied with all kinds of stuff about, everything from bioengineering with monkeys and tied into vaccines and tied into just any and everything. The JFK conspiracy is just vast and endless. And I think it's storytelling.
Yeah, you're talking about the polio vaccine. That's the Dr. Mary's monkey and those things. Yeah, that story. But what would be the? I guess you could you look at there's some sort of a cult meaning here, because obviously with JFK you had this sort of the myth of Camelot. Then of course you have the killing of the king, which is sort of a ritual, and you have the same. Some people have noticed the same thing with 9/11. Of course, 9/11 it's the numerology is there. With the 9 and the 11, of course, you have the Twin Towers. I always thought it was, it looked like a great marketing angle. 9/11, 9/11. But with these events, a lot of people have attached a lot of Freemasonic meaning to it.
And then you see all that tied into the official storyline, and there's all these kind of numerology, all these different things, aspects incorporated into it, and then you got to ask yourself, like, how easy would that be to pull off if they're they're doing it for real, like say and not have any unforeseen consequences of having, like, for instance, George Bush Sr. standing by the side of the road, and at the same time you got bullets flying everywhere, and it's like, what's to prevent Senior catching a bullet in the throat when he's standing out there? Supposedly there's bullets hitting curb, block chunks of concrete hitting people and everything. There's bullets flying everywhere like a turkey shoot, just going wild with bullets triangulating on Kennedy and shooting at him, supposedly. So I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't make any damn sense. I mean, because you have you got to conduct this psychological operation, but since you're doing it for real, there's all this potential for things to go, really, really off course, because you're using real bullets and you're using real, assassins that have, where are you going to get these people? What are their backgrounds? Can you trust them? Are they, there's all kinds of contingencies that have to be dealt with in something doing it for real. And then you have a bystander, and what about an important bystander getting accidentally a stray bullet?
Yeah.
I mean, so many variables would enter in something like that, a real assassination. That what would make the most sense, because it's what's important. The important takeaway is like how it shaped the mass mind. What was the psychological impact on the mass mind, and that's the end goal, I believe, in these because we know that the official story of what happened to JFK is an absolute bullshit. I mean, I hope. I didn't mean to cuss there, but yeah.
It deserves it. The Warren Report, yeah.
Yeah, the Warren Report. It's just total nonsense. I mean, but I think any sensible person would know that. But it's like, the whole alternative conspiracy. I mean, the conspiracy theories. A lot of the stories too don't make sense either. It's like, why are they going to have Oswald in the school book depository when he took the shot from the grassy knoll? Why not place? I mean, while you're manufacturing the evidence and doing all that, through the cover up and all that, why not put Oswald at the grassy knoll? Like it would just be a matter of just adjusting the timelines and all that, and just real simple matter of just saying, oh, he was there, but it wouldn't make sense to. It just doesn't make sense. It's like they had to do some real gymnastics to kind of explain a lot, when if you're engaged in a cover up, it wouldn't even be necessary. But see, I mean, but then that's fodder for just endless speculation, and you got all the stuff surrounding it that but to me, what makes the most sense is like you have a bit of street theater. Not saying everybody there present in Dealey Plaza was in on it. Didn't have to be. They have to be witness to the street theater. And what do they need to see? They need to see Kennedy, right? Mm-hmm. He needs to be going down the road in the limo, and Jackie's there and everything, just like you saw on the Zapruder film, and just like was printed in the papers and Newsweek, Time Magazine. Yeah, I was there. I saw that. Well, what else do you see? Well, I heard a pop. Well, that obviously must be gunfire, because we know that Kennedy got his head shot off. What did you see? Well, I saw Kennedy go down, slump down, and then the limousine took off. I'm just saying, perspective, if you're a witness there.
Yeah.
What's interesting is like there's all these crowds on the street, and when they get to the point where he was about to get shot, it's like really thinly, a very sparse crowd in comparison. So yeah, a controlled environment, because you got the Secret Service and all the people crawling around, FBI, setting up the stage for the event. And then two, I mean, how many of them have to actually be in on the whole hoaxing of it? I don't know. I think you could have it really neatly controlled with the nature of compartmentalization. Not everybody have to be in on it. It just, you could be there and still believe with all your heart that JFK was assassinated. See what I mean?
Well, yeah, because if you ever been at an event like that, and if you're just not necessarily an assassination, just an outdoor event, and if something sudden happens, your perception of what happened, may not be an accurate remembrance of what actually did happen, or your perspective is skewed, or it's limited, very limited.
Or for instance, I could say, Tim, I was there at Dealey Plaza. I was looking right at Kennedy when he got his head blowed off. I didn't see no brains coming out, man. I didn't see him. All I see him was just he slumped down.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, that's absolutely ridiculous, Chris. How did he? Well, here's what happened. You just blinked.
Yeah.
You just happened to blink when his brains went everywhere. I said, well, now that I think about it, maybe I did blink. I don't know if I can't remember if I blinked or not. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I blinked. It's just that easy. I mean, but what do you need to have on the scene? You just need to, set up the presentation. And like I said earlier, all the media, the press, the subsequent books and movies and films and everything fills in all the rest. And you can take it as far as you want. You want to go into the conspiracy thing right there. You got all those creative writers to keep you occupied for as long as you want to be occupied by it.
Well, again, it's one of these things where you're dealing with mass media, and the vast majority, again, of the people, just like 9/11 or the Kennedy assassination, experienced the assassination through the television set through people like Walter Cronkite, a paid misinformer. So again, it's like I know it's true because I saw it on TV, as the John Fogerty song goes. But again, it is a medium. It's a production, and it's like anything. It's open to manipulation, and there's no reason why just because you're watching it you should take it as gospel, because the history of that medium is manipulation. There's a history for it, so I don't. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not. Again, it's a mental exercise. We're trying to think these things out, but I think it was as far as something like a fake assassination going down. I think it was Fletcher Prouty who used to was telling stories of how, was it Prouty? I think it was Prouty. How CIA teams would go in a Latin American country and stage a shootout where, and then people would fake die. They pretend to die, get shot, and then they just drive away and clear out. And just there'd be news stories about these things happening. And this would serve some sort of psychological warfare objective or some political objective. But the point is the whole thing was staged.
Yeah, that's in his book, Secret
Team. Yeah, I think it's Secret Team. So that's being played out in those countries. So does something similar occur here in the United States or in Europe or something? And I mean, I think it's naive to think that something like that doesn't happen.
We have the Northwoods document, right?
Well, that admits like fake deaths and crisis actors, because you'd have to have people claiming that they lost loved ones because of evil fidelity.
Talk about having actors and then bringing down a drone, like a plane. It's remote control, bringing it down, crashing it, and saying that like the group of students was shot down by Cubans, and then have fake family members come out and cry, and they interview them in the media, and then it like Kissinger said, it's not what's true that matters, is what's perceived as true that matters, especially with politics or anything related to what we're going to be sold, because what this stuff is. Here's another way that I like to put this in this sort of contextual framework to kind of get a better understanding, is like what 9/11 is and what the Boston bombing is and what these things are. They're actually like sales pitches in a sense. They're like marketing campaigns. And what is the product? It's like, well, among other things, for one thing, it's like, to sell you the idea of big government or the state, and they're loving protection, that we need their strong arms of protection around us to keep us safe.
It's Patrick Henderson calls it police state pageantry.
Police state pageantry, that's a good one. It's like that's what, and what was 9/11? It was like probably the most successful, recruitment film. And even though when you go look into it, they'll say, "Oh, there wasn't no big upswing in people joining the military," and it's like, well, I mean, not according from my experience, because I've talked to several people who said, "Oh, I joined right after 9/11," and I've heard other people say that too. They know people that joined after 9/11, but even if they didn't, it was like a it was like a recruitment piece, and also like to reestablish and reconfirm and to prop up the idea of the need for this massive military industrial complex state apparatus to justify its existence, because we're wrapping up the whole Cold War nonsense around that time, right? In the 90s.
And you also had, of course, the most, I guess most people are familiar with, or people looking at 9/11 are familiar, small potato things like the put options, but there's also the matter of the missing gold, and also the $240 billion bonds that were able to be cleared, which trace back to Operation Hammer, which was targeting Russia, destabilization of the looting of Russia in the 90s. So there's all types of complex financial dealings going on there. Not to mention the fact that it appeared part of what went down there was a huge insurance scam with Silverstein.
Right.
Yeah, there's a video now. He's talking about he was planning to the demolition, the planned rebuilding of WTC-7 in 2002, and this was like before 9/11. Now, was that complex being planned to be destroyed? Before that, no, there were no plans to destroy WTC-7 at that point. But we now know that there were estimates on the destruction of the Twin Towers, which were in the billions because of the asbestos issue, and it was the towers themselves are always kind of a white elephant. They were always a money loser. Apparently, they were much more vacant than people were aware. So there's a whole scam there going on there. That goes back to the Rockefellers and the Port Authority in the 60s and 70s. Why that place was ever built.
Yeah, that's in that book, Divided We Stand, Eric Darton, if I'm saying his name correctly, and that was written several years before 9/11, and it's not even in any way, shape, or form a conspiracy book at all, but it's just talking about what you described as white elephants. They didn't really serve any kind of real purpose as demand for office space or anything like that. There was no need for that. It was,
but they're symbols.
Yeah, they're symbols. Yeah, they were more just kind of symbols, landmarks. And then just so happens that they came out with the major motion pictures that were very popular right around that time, which was Towering Inferno and Airplane or Airport?
Airport.
I get the Airport. And and the imagery, you go look at the imagery that was presented in those two films, and it's like, and then think of terms of 9/11, and it's pretty startling. You have all the resonant imagery in those two films. You combine them together, and it's like, a lot of veiled references. It seems like to things that would be suggestive of what the foreshadowing of what would be to come.
Even King Kong in the 1976 version.
Oh yeah, right.
He climbs the Twin Towers.
King Kong
and jumps from tower to tower, if I recall.
Yeah, and why put this? Why come right out of the gate? Putting the representing towers and stuff, and having that themes of films, and that's a good one, King Kong. I never incorporate that into all this, but King Kong. So it's like showcasing the towers. So it's getting them into people's minds, and then of course there was a lot of press surrounding the Twin Towers and a lot of hoopla surrounding it and fanfare and and then at the same time Hollywood's associating these the idea of towers and then with disaster.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this. I've heard it's referred to as predictive programming, or and then I've heard the reason the idea of that is so then when the so-called real event happens, people are already on some level have some familiarity with it.
Oh, like Fight Club, right? The end of Fight Club.
End of Fight Club. That's another good one. And then when was that? Film was in the late 90s, right?
99, 2000 time frame, I think.
Yeah, around 99, 2000. And then, part of the plot in that film is they control demolition of buildings.
Yeah, and then there's also, I think you've mentioned this before, it's Independence Day. You have the, this vertical collapse of these buildings.
Yeah, that's another big one. And if you look at that film, there's a article I posted at hoaxbusters.com. It's been a while back. You have to go back in the older archives to find that. But semiotics and the 9/11 and an Independence Day, where this person did an analysis of it. And it's not even a conspiracy analysis at all. It's just and I guess this particular scholar, he may be chalking it all up to coincidence, but I don't know. He doesn't expressly state anything, any kind of anything nefarious going on there. But it's just talking about how that whole film informed the whole 9/11 narrative even to the point where you had reporters on the scene making reference to Independence Day. They say, it's just like a scene out of Independence Day. I can't believe it. It's just like Independence Day. And it's like, yeah, because if you go back and look at Independence Day, there's all kinds of things that's reminiscent of 9/11. Like you had the president, that was also a pilot.
That's right.
And then like his rousing speech, he delivers it through a megaphone.
Yeah.
It's like you saw that of course with Bush, and then and Bush dressed up in the flight. Bush is a former pilot, and he's dressing up in pilot outfit and landing on aircraft carriers, strutting around and all that stuff. And and then you had the aliens in Independence Day, and if you look at look at the shape of their heads and look at a guy that's wearing a turban, it's oddly reminiscent of a dude wearing a turban. If you look at it right, it's like, semiotics, a use of symbology to for purposes of conveying ideas and drawing association and solidifying those ideas in the mass mind. And the Independence Day is a big one. And they also have which I believe is a totally deliberate 9/11 there in the countdown to destruction, because the guy, the whole plot of the film, the scientist guy figures out that they're sending a signal, and he figured out some way to decipher, and it turns out that it's a countdown, and then it's a countdown to when these big motherships start open up a can of whoop ass on the earth. And so the key scene in the film is like where he's got a laptop and he's got the software in there, and he could view the countdown, and then it's at 9/11 right before it switches to the scene where you see the top down destruction of the White House and the big skyscrapers and major cities and all that. Yeah, it's pretty. It's really, when you look at that and you take into consideration, you think of 9/11 and the foreplan and the pre-planning and everything surrounding that, and that's also being incorporated in films. It really gives you it just gives you a whole new perspective on the world and how things are actually done, and it's really, when I ran across that stuff, it's pretty unsettling. It's kind of like, it's like, wow, this is really. The world's not what you think. Things aren't that as they seem,
Well, again, most people will take in these things over time, and so they'll, Independence Day, they watched in 1996, Fight Club they watched in 1999, The Lone Gunman they watched in 2001, The Simpsons whenever, but it's when it's presented to you like this. And someone does the research and presents all these examples of the predictive programming or foreshadowing, it strains credulity to say this is coincidence. How many times does 9/11 show up? Like there's the cover of the I think it's the May or April 1967 cover of Newsweek with David Rockefeller overlooking Manhattan in his office, and his watch is set to 9/11. The two hands are on 9 and 11 on his watch.
Yeah, it's just pretty astounding. It's just like, well, that could be, and if you want to look at 9/11 predictive programming, there's just endless examples, and you could probably say that maybe some of those could be coincidental. Not all of them, I think, are rock solid, but there's just so many that are just pretty blatant in film, especially. That there's just no way it could be coincidental.
And also, the obvious examples in the run up to 9/11 is the prominence of Arab terrorists in various Hollywood movies.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden, like
True Lies, Executive Decision.
Back to the Future.
Oh yeah,
Back to the Future has a lot of 9/11 references. Oddly enough,
the Twin Pines, the Twin Pines Mall. The clock stops at 9/11.
Yeah, it stops at 9/11, and then when he comes back, it's what is it? 11. What is it? It's inverted 1:16.
Yeah.
Twin Pines Mall becomes the Lone Pine Mall, like the Twin Towers become the Freedom Tower or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's this really really well done analysis of the Back to the Future. Like you look that up on YouTube, you can bring all that stuff up. But yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, that's a fascinating subject. Like what this predictive programming thing. It's like, why is this done, and why all this effort to go through all that trouble to really put this stuff out there in these films, and to have it like, you have to be paying close attention to pick up on it, but it's there. It's definitely there. And so like I say, everything is captured by your subconscious mind and stays in there, So your subconscious is registering all this stuff in film. And then, when 9/11 comes along, you have all these subconscious references to this, so-called event that are going to condition your reaction to it.
Yeah,
and get you to And
there's always the trauma, which suspends your critical faculties, or inhibits them, or disables them. So you can look at things and just accept things like the idea of 19 Arabs with box cutters taking over 4 planes and outsmarting, the air defense, and not getting they fail to get planes up in an hour and a half, and to respond to these things. So just the sheer trauma of the event will prevent most people from critically analyzing stuff. At the same time, they're watching. They got their eyes pinned to the TV set, right? They're just watching all this stuff happening, which is then just magnifying the trauma and the mind control, you could say. And then, of course, right after that, there's the anthrax attacks, which is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, there was the anthrax attacks. Yeah, I always kind of forget about that happening, right? And then,
which, by the way, are officially an inside job, officially have nothing to do with 9/11. Yet, if you investigate the anthrax attacks, there are direct ties to the alleged terrorist. Because you remember the stories of the one terrorist having subcutaneous anthrax that was supposedly doctors saw, and I think the boss, the editor of the photographer that died down there in Florida from the anthrax attacks, his wife was the real estate agent for Muhammad Atta and a couple of the alleged terrorists down there in Florida. But nevertheless, we were told that it had nothing to do with the anthrax. With 9/11, anthrax had nothing to do with 9/11 attacks. So, out of a nation of 300 million people, to the extent that people are aware of this, because we're expected to believe that somehow Muhammad Atta was using the wife of the editor of the Sun newspaper down there that was a target of the anthrax attacks as a real estate agent looking for a place to rent or something. So, I mean.
Yeah, all these bizarre happenstances. Yeah, these coincidences that pop up around 9/11. Yeah, there's just endless with all those. It's just, it never ends with 9/11. I mean, the astounding coincidences that surround it. So, yeah, I don't know how people can even do a cursory investigation into 9/11 and come away with anything other than what was presented on the television is just pure fiction. It just has to be.
Well, I've presented this to just in forms of questions to people, and I don't think I think you've said this before, is they don't want to know.
Well, that has to be the case because here it is, how many years after the fact, and people, for the most part, are really compliant with the official story of 9/11, and believe that it was terrorist. Even though they might have questions, even though they might have seen the so-called conspiracy videos out there, maybe because this is all over YouTube, it's all over the internet. These videos will have hundreds of thousands or millions of views, these 9/11 conspiracy videos. So probably a good sizable portion of the population is aware of the problems, with the official story. But yet and I've seen this. I've seen this personally with people. It's like this particular individual. We were having a discussion, and they basically convey to me that no, they don't believe that 9/11 happened, like I said, and they said, yeah, it's probably a bunch of nonsense. And then I talked to this person later when around the time when supposedly Osama bin Laden was killed with SEAL Team 6 and all that other nonsense, that they're like, oh yeah, did you hear about that? Oh, isn't that great that Osama bin Laden got killed? They got that bastard. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I thought you thought 9/11 was much baloney. See, yeah. So it's like, well, yeah, this I guess you call it cognitive dissonance or double think. It's a way to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time, and I think that's a skill that, well, skill or whatever you want to call it, and most people in this system possess. They can have two contradictory ideas in their head at the same time, and just go with it.
I think it's an adaptive quality that's necessary for day-to-day survival.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
That's the only thing I can think of. Because I think what happened is the cost of dealing with the contradictions, and going forth from that point is too much, and there's too little immediate gain for speaking up about these things. There's too little immediate gain. In fact, if anything, there's the threat of ostracism, and just also despair because your paradigm is being shattered. As you said, the world doesn't function as the way you thought you were told it functioned, and you were betting on it functioning the way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much easier just to slump back and go, I'm not going to go there. It's just one of those things. I think a sizable percentage of people will. It's just a question. I think the majority never will. I mean, that's why that's why most people are shadow watchers. They're watching shadows on the wall. And if those people who point out that hey, there's a reality out there, they will even go so far as to kill the person for exposing their chains and saying, hey, there's something, this is a show, this isn't real, because you're upsetting their worldview. It's it's almost like you're killing their god.
Yeah, that is really I talk about this quite a bit. It's how the idea of nations, and we live in this this nation, this social construct, this idea, this abstract concept called the United States or America, or from my viewpoint is that America is a cult. I mean, it has all the characteristics of what would be descriptive of a cult. It has all the trappings of a cult. It has the objects of veneration, the devoted followers, the same kind of tactics that are used to keep people in line, social proof and ostracization and everything that goes along with a cult. And you say, well, it's too big to be a cult. It's too all-encompassing to be a cult, because the cults are mostly defined as something, like as fringe groups or small conglomerations of people. But it's like, well, if you take the United States as a day, and you take into consideration everybody that's ever lived on the planet during the history of mankind, it's actually, if you want to add all that up, it'd be a relatively small cult. Yeah. It's just a matter of
the global population or something. Yeah.
All right, it's all relative to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is a cult. I mean, it's no doubt a cult to me, and so yeah, you're dealing with this. You're going to be confronted with the same kind of attitudes and the same kind of thought patterns and the same kind of behavior that you're going to be confronted with like a Scientologist, for instance, or you're trying to maybe you have a good friend that went into Scientology, and you're trying to talk him out of it, and you're trying to persuade him out of it, and it's like, man, I don't, you're saying that L. Ron Hubbard is a reincarnated space god? Really, dude? I mean, like, you think he's reincarnated? If out the space being the Xenu character, that I mean, you really, it's like science fiction, man. Come on, it's like you're not going to convince them. They've already have their, for whatever reasons, whatever their own reasons, they've made an investment into this artificial construct, the Scientology construct. And they've been taken through the process, the brainwashing and all that. And it's easy to see when you're pointing this out in a group like Scientology, or maybe even Mormonism, or some other kind of these or some kind of a cult, like a New Age cult or something like that. It's easy from the outside looking in, but when you're in it, you've been brought up and raised in it, like the cult of America. Mm-hmm. It's harder to see. But no, all the same contingencies are in place.
Well, I mean,
same thing
to maintain social cohesion and stability, and you could say the cult does that through various tactics, exploiting human weaknesses or human psychology. The same tactics are used to maintain a national identity or social cohesion. In fact, that much has been admitted in various, RAND Corporation documents, NSC, the first, back in the NSC 68, talked about this, about, maintaining social cohesion through the Cold War dialectic, right? Creating the communist boogeyman. In fact, it's been more or less admitted. Senator Vandenberg told Harry Truman to scare the hell out of the American people. That's what cults do, right? I mean, it's
right.
Is that fear of the other, or you have to stick together? I mean, so people have so much invested in their nation, in their country, in their history, and whether it's World War II or there's certain narratives of World War II, people become invested because those narratives form their idea of what their country is, what their country accomplished. So if you start to, pick and look at the evidence, look at details, and start to pick away at these myths, you're engaged in a certain amount of iconoclasm. And again, you're killing their gods. You're smashing their myths, their paradigm, or the statues they've built. And if you doubt this, you just go down, look. If you're ever in DC, go look at the World War II memorial.
Yeah.
Go to the museum and poke out and just start making notes of all the lies and distortions that are in museums.
Right, and then Scientology is going to tell you about how the Earth got populated with some kind of refugees from a planet that was destroyed by volcanoes or something like that. It's like, it's a pretty interesting story, I guess.
Yeah.
They were on spaceships, and that's pretty cool. Spaceships going through space, and and then see that, and it's kind of an incremental indoctrination process. So the higher you go up on the ladder, the more you get introduced to more of the pretty far-fetched aspects of Scientology, as far as the whole mythology that props it up.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is with the cult of America. I think people that are higher up in the upper level management stuff, they're privy to a lot more things than the average person is.
Yeah, it's like a Freemasonic setup or something. Yeah.
Right, yeah, but see, it's just like in Scientology. Once you get to that upper levels where you're getting introduced to Xenu, and he's and then L. Ron Hubbard is the reincarnation of Xenu, and all this like really wild, far out stuff. At that point, you already have so much invested in course time and money and stuff like that. And that's how this works. It's like that. All cults work. That's dependent upon the amount that you got invested in, is how much will be revealed to you. And then once that's revealed to you, and you accept these preposterous ideas about the reincarnated space gods and the stuff, that you go a step further. You're even more solidified into your resolve to be a part of that goal. But then then again, some people break away at that point where that's just too much. I mean, okay, come on, that's like this enough. I got to get out. Sometimes that happens. There's that it's a pretty good documentary on that HBO put out. I think I don't know how much of it's true, but it's pretty revealing as far as how cults work. But yeah, it's no different with nations. I don't think. I think that some people that are higher up, they get it in on the noble lie concept that you can put this stuff out there into the media sphere that's just patently false. It's lies. Or even I'm talking about these people too that participate in these orchestrated hoaxed events. They've bought into a philosophy, a worldview that allows them to do that and to function in that context. And that's how they've been through a processing, and they also have the investment into it. They're probably lifelong career people in any kind of agency or FBI or military or something like that. So once they get let in on those secrets, they're already high up in the chain.
Yeah.
So in order for them to break ranks would represent totally nullifying everything they've ever stood for or worked for in their life. So it would be just a immediate eradication of ego and their sense of self and everything. It would be a hard step to make, right?
Yes.
To get to that point, and then you realize, so you have to adopt the noble lie concept, which I don't think is too hard to do for a lot of these people, because they get this elitist mentality, like, oh well, the masses are. That's just something you hear a lot too. Even alternative media is, oh, the sheeple or the masses are just so dumb. So you got to have and they certainly think that way too. I believe. So that they need to be managed, and the way to manage is to feed them bullcrap and to get them in line.
Yeah. And yeah, that's why you have. Well, again, if you look at the development of media, mass media, it was all about studying how we can manipulate people, how we can change their behavior with marketing, and someone like Edward Bernays, of course, a lot of people behind Edward Bernays, and he continued. It wasn't just him, but the strategy there, the same way you can make someone a sort of a mindless consumer, you can also make him a sort of a mindless, jingoist too. Go off and fight. Go off and seek revenge for whether it's the Lusitania or Pearl Harbor, or the Gulf of Tonkin, because by then it was almost mechanical. Then it was almost like, after Korea, when Truman could send hundreds of thousands of soldiers to go fight on an Asian mainland for an attack, for a cross-border dispute over there in Asia, and have nothing happen. Congress do nothing. Completely, of course, it's under the auspices of the United Nations, but that just was a signal that pretty much all bets are off now. There were no restrictions anymore. Previous presidents at least had to get a declaration of war. And now, since we've no longer declared war, there's now there's endless war.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the irony.
Well, isn't that I talk about that a lot with law? It's defining your terms, and it always comes down to that. It's like, well, I thought this was this, but it's like, well, no, they can kind of change the definitions on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
That's how malleable it is. That's why I say it's arbitrary, it's capricious. It's kind of it's really it's not substantive. It's not real. It's not objective, or it's not a tangible thing. So it's like it's endlessly malleable, so that it can be shaped to whatever shape that the people who are in the management levels and stuff like that, they have an understanding of that. I even think that even people such as like, chiefs of police and stuff like that, they have sort of like a politician's mindset. I think they even have an innate kind of understanding, they kind of, and then they rise up in the ranks with that kind of understanding where they know really how things work. And then there's nothing to this thing called law. I think they on some level have a real understanding that, like, yeah, I mean, there's nothing to this thing called law. That's how they end up, transitioning to the position of like a politician or somebody that's going to be a public relations person. I'm talking about people who will be like in your police departments that will be rolled out as a media spokesman or something like that, like a chief of police or somebody that's is going to interface with the public. And you listen to their speech patterns and how their usage of words and stuff like that, and they become conversant in words of art, so that they are more of better manipulators. Mm-hmm. They're better manipulators and able to understand. They have a deeper understanding of how the true nature of the system, even though they may not be fully consciously aware of what's going on. I think they do for the most part, but even there's others that kind of play the game better than others, because it's and I think a lot of it has to do with somebody's some people's predisposition, just the way that it's the way their personality lends itself to that sort of manipulation. But it is, it's like it's to have a way with persuasive words so that you can deal with situations that arise and still come across as being authoritative and then knowing what you're talking about, and people defer to your word even though what just came out of their mouth is absolute nonsense.
The art of public speaking.
Yeah, that is what it is. It's like an art. It's an art form. It's nothing more than it's some sort of art form. It's like learning some kind of a skill, like learning jiu-jitsu or something like that. It's just sort of an art form. It's not really something that is necessarily can be taught to someone so that they become an expert in it. Something has to be kind of felt. Something has to be intuited. Something has to be, sort of second nature to certain people. And yeah, that's the people that will go up in the ranks. And it's interesting how the system really works, and what I'm talking about is like what it really is. And it's like, the average person, I don't think, stops to think about things too much, where they just kind of will be just open to all kinds of psychological manipulation tactics. And this is replete all throughout the system. That's why I'll go into talking about law. I'll go into talking about bureaucrats and cops and stuff like that, and just anybody who's had any dealings with them, it's like, yeah, how do they act? How do they present themselves, and how do they talk? And like, why do they have this ability to persuade? I mean, besides the fact that they're carrying guns and pepper spray, with them, it's like, it's a way of, there's a very distinct way that a cop will speak, and it's from their training.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that, it's like, it's kind of odd. It's like, it's like this sort of formal language that they use, and they all use it, to one degree or another. Some are better than the others, but it's a style of speaking, and it's clearly, when you stop and think about it, it's like, yeah, that's clearly for the purposes of manipulation, psychological manipulation. It's something about it that is more persuasive than just a guy who's dressed in a uniform talking street lingo. you know, just like a regular guy. They don't talk like regular people. They have this stilted, sort of formal speech patterns and different kind of terminology and stuff that they use that it conveys this idea of authority somehow, you know, and that is something that is learned. But then, you know, the more adept, like I said, will rise in the ranks, and then, you know, it all comes down to manipulation. It's you know, psychological tactics and manipulation. And I'm sure you've talked before about linguistic programming and those concepts and stuff like that, and how you know, now in the modern day, especially with people that are employed in, you know, public relations and stuff like that, you can pick up on their manipulative speech, where they're employing this thing called linguistic programming, which is a type of it's almost like a type of brainwashing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course it helps when you have the I guess the majesty and authority of the state.
Certainly,
with the threat of violence behind you.
But then you ask yourself too, well, how does that sustain itself, or how does it even get like established in the first place? You know, like how does it, you know, how do we get to the point where, like, you know, you get shaken in your boots when you go stand before a judge? Like what? It's like, why? I mean, this is just some dude in a dress, you know, like why am I nervous? You know, it's like, but you know, it's like that's through conditioning and through programming. You know, we've been programmed to respond that way. But if you go look into how a courtroom is laid out, it's like a lot of similarities to how when you go into a church and how the layout will be. So you got the main guy sort of elevated above everybody else on this kind of platform, and then he's sitting behind this big imposing kind of either podium or stand, or like in the case of a judge, like this sort of big desk looking thing, you know. Like, and then, you know, that's going to invoke, that's going to be reminiscent of what you started in, like kindergarten and first grade. You go to school and it's like sort of everything is sort of configured that way, where you have the imposing figures sort of up front center, and then all eyes on them, on the teacher, and the teacher is sort of elevated above the rest. And then, you know, they're in this sort of centralized focus up front. And,
and you have to stand when the judge enters.
Yeah, you have to stand when the judge enters, and like, well, same thing with your teacher. You have to, you know, you have to sit down in your seat and stop squirming around, Tim. Stop shooting spit wads at the girl over there, and you listen, because you know that there's. My first day of school, I got paddling. Like I remember that, but it's like that because I was, you know, I had ODD. I was like I didn't know what was that, you know, what was at stake there. But I learned quick after I got paddled, you know. You learn that, you know. It's like, oh, the teacher, oh, she just belongs small. She just shut your mouth, teacher, you know. But I didn't say that. That's not why I got paddling. But you know, I was, you know, being disruptive or whatever. But yeah, so you get introduced to the concept of authority, you know, this authority. And the subsequent, at that time, corporal punishment and all that. But
well, even the 15,000 hours of public schooling goes a long way in conditioning people to accept all the BS that our intelligence is insulted with every day. You know, so that's the long conditioning. It's, you know, whether it's just the textbooks, you know, what level of education kids get these days. I don't know what the standards are these days, but the whole thing is just geared towards, I think, at the very least, boring you into submission.
Right? Yeah, you know? Well, I think that's the way I took it too. It's like, oh God, they're gonna, kill me with boredom in here. But I think that's part of the process too, because it's so, especially for young boys, I think all the energy, the pent up energy, and it's just excruciating to have to sit there, and it's boring, and it's just like,
and they pathologize it.
They pathologize
drugs.
Right? Yeah, it's bad to have all that energy is strong. So
the assumption that everyone should be crammed into a classroom and all the education should be the same for male and females and the whole classroom setting, but. the notion that that okay, let's pack these people into one room and let's assume that our plan, our education plan, is going to be good for each one of these kids. I mean, it's terrible. Now, I mean, I know at some point you got to generalize at some point if you're going to have a class, but at the very least, they've done studies at how damaging the current school setting is for boys, but it's also for girls in another way. I was listening to a podcast recently talking about how in the 19th century, when girls were taught separately, they did very well at math and science. It's when they brought girls in with boys and they started to lose out and I guess lose interest in these things because girls express themselves differently when they're around boys, and boys obviously behave differently when they're around girls. Girls are more inhibited when they're around boys, so it's going to affect their academic performance and things like math and science. So at the very least, the single-sex education, as opposed to co-ed, is beneficial to both sexes. But the whole idea of between co-ed education is, again, I think is it's a social engineering scheme ultimately to dumb everyone down and blur the differences and social engineer society and these things. The whole high school scene is based on co-ed education. The modern concept of what the high school life should be. Yeah.
Right. Even though it's proven to be better to have segregated classrooms.
Yeah.
But now everybody accepts the co-ed situation because that's just the way it is, and that's the way it's done.
Yeah. And then the kids behave a certain way, and kids will be kids.
Right. Then it's the kids' problem.
Yeah.
And you got to put them on some kind of psychiatric drugs, help them get their mind right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the schools. You think about it, it's a really oppressive environment. It's really oppressive and really stultifying. Really, just your natural urges are just constantly being suppressed, where you want to it's a natural inclination of a young child is to run, to burn off that energy, to get out there in the fresh air and the outside, and that's where I always wanted to be. I remember when I was in school, it's like,
you have parents acknowledge this, how they're depressed. They even get depressed to come fall because they remember school, but then they subject their kids to the same thing.
I know,
because habit is a great flywheel of society. It's someone once said, and that's what it is. I think I think that's probably how we should close this conversation out. Is we're used to these things. We're born into these institutions. We're born into these ways of doing things. So I mean, it's hard to break out of that. Hard to break out of the pack and be a little different and start to think differently.
Well, yeah, it certainly is. After you've had that long of a period of conditioning, it's difficult. And then, where does the belief in this authority begin? Well, it begins in school, and then it progresses on throughout your life, and then it gets to a point where they could literally show you cartoons. What I think are literally cartoons of the planes coming in one outside and coming out the other, kind of like on a like the Roadrunner would do through like a rock wall or something like that. And then if the government tells you that's reality, then you accept it as reality, which is like, you ought not. That's not something that you should accept as reality. You should have enough possession over your own faculties to realize that that's what you're being shown as absurdist. But then, you got to ask yourself, well, how do people get to that point? Well, it's through conditioning, because you can't believe that that's a lie because it's too contrary to everything that you've been conditioned to believe your whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, it's also you have to believe in these things, because to believe in these things is to believe in your country, and your country is great, that it's done great things, and I guess by some transference or some way of thinking, because your country is great, you're great too. I guess
Uh-huh.
through osmosis, or I guess that you can claim some sort of greatness because you're an American too. But that's another mistake is when you point these things out, people think you're criticizing America as if what is America? You can't like baseball anymore, or be like your family, or love your wife and kids, or support your community anymore unless you identify or conflate America with with some politicians and some generals, some Pentagon brass, and some corporations. You know, so it's one of those things where, again, when you're pointing out some of these crimes or some of these conspiracy theories, you're not saying, well, gee, aren't we horrible? No, we're not horrible because the vast majority of the people weren't involved in it. We're just gullible. But
Yeah.
people make that mistake. What are you saying? You're saying America. You say America's never done anything great before. Or what is America? We landed on the moon. We did. I'm not going to question whether we did it or not. I'm just saying is people associate that accomplishment with themselves because they're Americans, and that's how you get people to believe in these things, I guess, because you tell them these great accomplishments, you're a part of it. So if these things aren't true, then a big part of themselves is lost because they've identified their identity is so invested in this perception, of what America is and what the world is. And so when you point these things out, they don't take too kindly to it. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, and it's really the whole idea that people get, that they buy into this idea of nationalism, you point out that all of this is based on myths. I point out like the founding fathers wore powdered wigs, and I call them powdered wig men, the magical powdered wig men that lived back before I was born, way back before I was born. I don't know any of them, but somehow, and the reason why I call them magical, I'm trying to figure out what made them magical, and I guess that their particular form of dress, what they were wearing, the powdered wigs, I don't know, trying to figure it out. How are they able to write stuff down on paper and make it law forever? That's some kind of ability that I don't have. I don't know anybody in my whole life that has that ability, that just simply you gather up in a room, write some stuff down on paper, and then have it just everybody follow it from that point forward. That's incredible. That's an incredible amount of power. It's kind of fictional fantasy stuff like you'd see like in X-Men or something. Like what were they X-Men? The founding fathers X-Men? Like they had some kind of genetic mutation or something that made them special in that way, where they could put something down on paper and then it's like magically binding on everybody. I don't know. It's myth. It's myth is what I'm trying to say. It's a myth. It's a fiction. It's a story. But then you want to, if you say that or bring that up, it's like people say, oh yeah, you're an America. You hate America is what you're saying, Chris. Is that what you're saying? It's like what does even that mean? What does it even mean? Define it. It's like, do I hate everybody that resides on this particular continent? Is that? It's like, well, that's what people would want to characterize you that way or something maybe, but it's like, well, no, it's not even saying that, but it's just pointing out that we've all been brainwashed.
Well, I mean that's obvious. If you go visit Lincoln in a Greek temple, well, he's giant. He's sitting in a Greek temple like Zeus or something.
Yeah, it looks awful religious to me.
Yeah, the Jefferson Memorial. Then you have this odd Washington Memorial. Which you ever think about that for a few?
Yeah, it's Osiris's penis up there. It's like, well, I don't know how does that make any sense?
Someone says, "Do you think America's a Christian nation?" Explain Washington D.C. to me.
Right. Explain that obelisk. Just how is that so prominent there? You're right. Yeah, it's just yeah. And then the other ones that are around that when I was in the area I saw where it's like pyramids they're also monuments to Washington. That are kind of scattered about in that kind of general area. Yeah. Pyramids, and it's like what is this dude? Why? I mean, he was really into Egyptology or something. Was Washington? That's why they made everything a pyramid or obelisk. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot. But yeah, it's the powdered wig men. Like who were they? But they had well, I mean, that's as an American, we have to accept that they had magical powers. Is it? It's like I don't know. It sounds kind of like, I don't know if it sounds more absurd than L. Ron Hubbard being a reincarnated space god, but it's pretty close.
It goes back to your saying that America's a cult.
No, it's a cult. It's a damn cult, and like people, yeah, they don't, yeah, it's so. I don't know if it's any more powerful than like a, belief in like the average, like a lot of people that are in Mormonism or anything like that, with Joseph Smith, or like I said, the Scientologist L. Ron Hubbard. It's like it's probably about the same level of adherence and belief, except for I think the reason why the belief in America would be stronger as and more resonant with people as being like a member of the cult is that its scope and its size,
Yeah,
basically, and that it's like the way that people arrive at truth is consensus reality or social proof, like how many other people believe in it. And I've had people, like friends, like tell me that I ask them, we go and talking about things like, well, how do you decide what you believe or what you don't accept? And it's like, he just flat out told me, admitted, like, oh well, whatever the majority people out there believe, I usually just go along with what the majority does. I was like, okay, yeah, it's like, but he's honest, and that's true. It's like,
yeah,
well,
that's
most
how
people
most
do.
people, and that's that's how most people have energy for. I think between work, responsibilities, and of course their mindless entertainment, which they choose to indulge in, that's they don't have much time to consider much else. And to the extent that they could, they don't want to because of cognitive dissonance. They can't afford to emotionally. They have too much invested in the current myths because it defines them. It defines what they, who they are, what they do, and quite frankly, often your job, your livelihood, your social arrangements, your friends are based on those, you accepting those myths. I mean, if that's not, you don't doubt that, just go to a party, you hang out, start talking about some of these things, and you'll find yourself you don't have any.
I don't even get invited to parties anymore.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I'm just listen to idle chat, the friendly. I mean, to a certain extent, you should. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be talking about these things all the time, but most people are. I mean, again, when you're dealing with some of these things, it's hard to be concerned about someone's new kitchen or their garden. Maybe their garden has some value.
Yeah,
garden. Yeah, that's practical. But no, my point is that again, you find yourself, these things make people very uncomfortable, and so just that they have to look up, to make them look. Instead of just looking ahead, you have to look side to side, find out what's really going on. They don't want to do that because they want to get ahead in life. You don't get ahead by looking from side to side. You stay on the path and do what you're told.
Well, yeah, too. I think too. Like, what is the nature of the relationship we have with this thing called government? Well, I call it like people's invisible daddy. It's like the invisible daddy, because like people like to disparage religion and stuff. Oh, you believe in the big daddy in the sky. It's like, well, what about you and your invisible daddy here in the government?
Yeah,
that's your invisible daddy. You believe in him, and like you don't doubt anything. Because it's interesting. The same people that classify themselves as skeptics, and they're usually the people that like are really down on religious belief and stuff like that. You ask them if anything they believe in the state, or they believe in the Constitution, or they believe in like the authorities and stuff like that, and it's like, oh yeah, they absolutely do.
Yeah,
like a Sam Harris, like listen to stuff he says. He's a statist through and through. He's absolutely 100% devoted in his unswerving belief in statism. Which is it's a religion. It's a religious belief. It's powdered wig men doctrines and mythologies, and yeah, he's a firm believer in it. But it's like, yeah, his invisible daddy. It's like, what do you take me to show me to the government? And it's like, they can't do it. It's like, well, where is it? Oh, it's this building. No, it's like, well, churches have buildings too, don't they? Is that proof that God is in that building. But well, not even the people that built the building, but no, it's proof of it's evidence of their belief in God. Just like evidence of the belief in government is all the government buildings. It's evidence of the belief. It's not evidence of the thing itself. It's evidence of the concept. Even though I believe in God myself personally, but I don't think that the evidence for God is the building.
Yeah, the building. Yeah.
It's not. That's not where I point to the evidence. But it's like, well, belief in government is like, well, show me the government. Show where is it? No, it's an abstraction. It's a social construct. But yeah, but it's a belief system. It's a belief system, and it's like it's the same as a cult. It's the same thing, and it's like but if you say that to a lot of people, they're like, oh, well, you're crazy because who will build the roads? Like it's some appeal to like necessity or something like that. It's like, well, that's like whether we need roads or don't need roads or how we do it or how we don't do it. It has nothing to do with the legitimacy of this thing called government. It has nothing to do with it at all. It's like, yeah, well, that just goes to show you there's no real argument out there for it. There is none. There's no real argument that it would establish it other than this idea that it's some sort of necessary evil. And it's like, well, how do you know that? It's like because you never lived in anything else besides a system that's characterized mainly by this centralized, imaginary, invisible daddy that has all this authority. It's like that's all we've ever known mainly. So it's like, oh yeah, no surprise that we would think that it's some kind of necessity like oxygen or gravity or whatever, water. It's like that's where we're at. That's how deep this cult is in the minds of its average adherent. It's like it's almost synonymous with a necessity like oxygen.
Well, it's like the irony is they'll say we need government to protect our rights, but historically governments have been the biggest violators of rights.
And they continue to be.
So
on a day you could find just endless examples of like cops abusing people and getting away with it, and like judges diddling little kids and getting away with it. And I was like, what? I mean, getting light sentences and all that stuff. Like, don't you see that these people don't adhere to the law, and it's not subject to this very dangerous situation. It's very damaging, and it destroys people's lives on a daily basis. They go to jail for having a plant that grows out of the ground, for crying out loud. And it's like it goes on every day. It's just obscene, the injustices that happen on a daily basis that are just accepted. And it's like, oh, this is all necessary. Oh, it's all necessary. It's like, yeah, I beg to differ on that, but it's like, yeah, can you convince because it's like, who will build the roads? But yeah,
who will protect us from our protectors, as the Romans used to ask. Right,
but I think a good rebuttal to the road argument is I brought this up on a call. I thought it was pretty good. I don't know, maybe it was kind of silly. It's like, well, what is like, Bob's tire shop, and he has tires, and like he kind of gets to thinking about stadiums and roads, and he's like, you know what, I think I want to change my business strategy. And he goes door to door, and like he's got his buddies, they like to go to the gym and work out, and they're on steroids, and they carry guns, and they're imposing and intimidating figures. And it comes down to like, hey, I noticed that your tread's getting a little thin on your car. You better come down to the tire shop. And the implied threat is there, like, oh, well, yeah, if you don't do it, it's just like the government, that you don't pay your taxes, and there's going to be consequences. There's going to be guys at guns at the door. Let's say the tire shop did it. But it's like, no, Chris, that would be bad because they're forcing you to put tires on your car. That's crazy. It's like, well, okay, now start using the same argument that they use on them. Say, oh, you're telling me that you're going to be driving down the road with no tires on your car, with bare rims? You need tires. You need tires on that car to get on the roads. And that's unassailable logic. That's the same logic that's used with the roads. It's like, well, you sure need tires for the roads, and Bob's got the tires, and well, now Bob's got a gun, and he's going to make sure that you get tires when he says you need tires. And there's like, why not? Why not? Like. You can't make the argument that you don't need tires to drive on the road. You can't. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe that's a little far fetched, but
well, I mean, again,
I think it's the same.
A little late in the conversation to bring this up, but people have done studies or done the research on that, and there were private road companies before they were pushed out by the state, and the joint stock companies. There's various ways roads could be built. There were toll roads built throughout the United States in the early part of the 19th century, until internal improvements became a big part of the Whig Party, then eventually the Republican Party. There were private railroads that were built that were done without any killing anybody. There was the Great Northern Railroad, I think, was privately built by James J. Hill, and he didn't kill any Indian doing it. He went into business with them, as opposed to the government railroads, which massacred the Indians. So there's your difference,
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there's what you're saying is there are different ways to do things.
Yeah, without
yeah.
coercion. I mean, that's not. There's the various ways you can do these things. It's
yeah, and you don't have to kill people. That's pretty nice. I mean,
yeah, it was also done more economically too, because there was the railroads were a big boondoggle. They were all part because senators owned stock in companies that were making money off the sale of iron. You had to buy iron from certain. From Pennsylvania Steel Interest, you had to buy Congressmen bought shovel companies and things like that at the same time. And it also played into the big scandals under the Grant administration, the Credit Mobilis scandal and all that stuff. But
so what did all that end up? How did that end up impacting the process of getting this road done or getting this track done? It
slowed it down.
Yeah, it slowed it down and it burdened it and made it probably 10, like everything we see today with what government costs
10
times more to do it with the government.
More blood. And there's an interesting story with Abraham Lincoln when he signed the Transcontinental Railroad Act. It was Cedar Bluffs, Iowa, was the connection between the Pacific Road and the Transcontinental Railroad. And as president, he was given power to choose where it was going to be, and lo and behold, it was where he had bought property.
Just so happens.
It seems like when John F. Kennedy imposed the embargo on Cuba, he went and bought I think it was Pierre Salinger, I think, went and bought a huge stock of Cuban cigars for him. Just before the embargo. So, these are the things that, inevitably what happens with these things. So,
yeah, that's government for you. Well, yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, yeah, you could just probably point out just countless examples of that sort of thing, and then. But yeah, the idea that there isn't any alternative to it is that is insane. That's
look at education. I mean, I saw it. I was in the Home Depot the other day, and this young girl walking around with a T-shirt. It says, "Support public schools." I go, well, unfortunately, I don't have a choice in that.
Yeah.
That's like, I do. I don't have a choice.
It should say thank you for supporting public schools.
She's probably a teacher. She works for
Yeah.
But I
should have told her that. So why don't you you need to change that to thank you, because I don't have a choice, lady.
Well, Chris, come up 2.5 hours, so I think I'll let you go. I want to thank you for chatting out for a couple hours.
It was fun.
Great.
Yeah, always enjoy speaking with you. So we get relaxed conversation and kind of go cover some different stuff. And
so I wanted to go. I don't know how I'm going to classify it when I post this. It was Chris and Tim just chew the fat. I mean, it's hard to.
Yeah. So he's put a asterisk on it and then go into detail on the bottom. Well, I don't. I try to title my stuff creatively, but sometimes it's hard to come up with a title on something.
I know. So when is this punk rock thing going to come out?
Well, hopefully we'll get it done next week, and then I'll upload it. I'm thinking probably it should be up there by Wednesday. We do it Tuesday or Tuesday evening or Wednesday.
Okay, good. Good. Okay, great. So it's hoaxbusterscall.com?
That's correct. Yeah, hoaxbusterscall.com or hoaxbusterscall.blogspot. Same thing. The URL resolves to the blog spot. It's a blog site.
Okay.
So that's basically it.
Great, cool. Okay. Well, let's call it a night, and have a nice Labor Day weekend.
All right, you do the same. Thank you.
And maybe a few more months from now, we'll talk again.
All right, that sounds good.
Great. Take it easy out there.
You too. Thanks, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.